Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. The interesting conglomeration of 5 countries spread across 4 continents coming under the acronym of BRICS is meeting in Durban, South Africa tomorrow. The 5 countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, all emerging economies have come together to leverage their economic and political power to counter the developed countries. What can we expect from the Durban summit, which is being attended by Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh? Is the BRICS Bank proposed to be set up to help infrastructure and development projects going to become a reality finally? What are the other areas in which the 5th summit will provide a new direction, if any? Will the bilateral meetings of Dr. Singh with the new Chinese President Xi Jinping and other leaders result in any interesting outcomes? We will discuss all this today with an experienced panel of guests. I have with me M.K. Bhadrakumar, former ambassador and a foreign policy analyst, Mohan Guruswamy, distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, Nandan Unnikrishnan, a senior journalist and also a senior fellow at the ORF, and Pramit Pal Chaudhary, foreign affairs editor at the Hindustan Times. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Bhadrakumar, one of the things which the Prime Minister has said before he left for Durban is that this summit is going to focus on reviving global growth. How real is this kind of an expectation?
Sorry, 1 second.
Prime Minister said before he left for Durban that in this summit they are going to be focusing, one of the things which they'll be focusing is to revive global growth. Mm-hmm. You think BRICS is designed to do something like this?
There is definitely much to be expected in that direction, because you must remember that this BRICS is taking place just before the G20.
Yes.
BRICS has been an idea, as an initiative that occurred first to the Russian mind, and Russia is hosting G20. And we've had statements to the effect that for the first time, the BRICS would be going into the G20 process with a unified stance, with a common approach, and with strong recommendations. As you know, BRICS' aspiration is in the direction of bringing in the contemporary realities not only in the world economy, but in terms of the international situation, into the frameworks which these emerging powers consider to be archaic. That is the framework which were born out of the debris of the World War II, yeah. Bretton Woods system and so on. So India places a lot of importance on the G20 process. And I must say not only India, all the BRICS countries. So I think Prime Minister's statement is to be seen in that. And then second point is the growth story is very much there, particularly for India. I read an interview by Jim O'Neill just 3-4 days ago of Goldman Sachs to Spiegel, where he said, in fact, he cited India as probably a straggler within BRICS. He saw that China's marginal drop in growth was more a matter of self-restraint for strong economic purposes. It decided to go a bit slow. Russia's prospects he rated as rather good, and so indeed Brazil, and South Africa is a case apart. But he found problems of governance as far as the Indian economy is concerned. So, I am very sure in this 14-hour journey to Durban, what would be certainly uppermost in Prime Minister's mind is the growth story about which he talks about insistently all the time in India. I think this is how we should see it.
Okay, Mohan, the thing is, what is the kind of clout which you think BRICS has? They're talking of, Ambassador Kumar also was talking about it. They were reforming the political and economic institutions across the. They're talking about it. How much clout does BRICS have to, do something like this?
You see, when the acronym BRICS was coined by Jim O'Neill at Goldman Sachs, these 4 countries were actually, number 8, 9, 10, and 11 in terms of GDP rankings. Those rankings have undergone a change in the last decade. The first 3 now are, in PPP terms, are the USA, China, and India.
Right.
So to that extent, it reflects some new realities. Okay, Russia following 5 or 6. BRICS started off as, the 4 countries outside the G7.
Right.
And they wanted a role in the international economic system, which was denied. It's pretty much a white club with Japan as an honorary white country in that. So to that extent, the world has no choice now but to deal with growth, which is flagging, and only China and India and Brazil are giving the growth.
Right.
Both China and India are the drivers here. And though India is less integrated with the world economy than China, India also contributes a lot to world growth. So, they really have to figure out a way how to crack the international system, which is, even now the IMF is dominated by the G6 and the G7.
Right.
And then their sword arm is NATO. They control the Security Council because, except for China and Russia, it's pretty much between the USA and Britain and France. So I think this process of undergoing change in the world system has begun, and BRICS has been the kind of the wedge through which that beginning has been made.
Okay. Nandan, so do you agree with Mohan that it's become the engine for this change at the global level? BRICS has become the engine for that change, and how far the kind of cloud it will enjoy when it goes, as Badri Kumar was talking, when it goes into this G20 meeting, what are the kinds of things they will be carrying into that from this summit?
Well, I cannot but agree that BRICS is very much a work in progress. But if you look at where it started 5 years ago and where it is today, you can undoubtedly agree that it has made great strides. And what was at one time dismissed as a virtual organization, and there was not much hope given in terms of it being very disparate in terms of economic models, political models, today has gelled and has found a lot of common ground. As far as what they will achieve at the G20, they still are looking at a more equitable or more just world, as they call it, but basically saying that, as Ambassador Badri Kumar pointed out, that the Bretton Woods system is in shambles,
Right.
does not reflect current realities. And current realities, as Mohan pointed out, are that India, Brazil, China are the drivers of growth. And therefore, they are asking for a greater say in how the new economic model or how the world should be governed.
Okay, let me get Pramit. Pramit,
Yeah.
they are asking for more say. Do you think they'll get that more say? How are they going to go about it? What is your view on this? That that the BRICS will be able to have more say in the G20 also?
Well, in the G20, they already are major players. I mean, next to the G8 nations, and really, you're talking only 3 or 4 countries in the G8 that matter. And China, let's keep in mind that within the BRICS, China is overwhelmingly the most important. China is greater than all of the other BRICS nations put together in terms of clout and in terms of GDP. The obvious demands that are going to be there will be to have voting patterns change in the IMF, the World Bank, to reflect the economic strength of the BRICS nations. Though keep in mind here that India is a little warier than the others, because India's concern is that the bulk of these new votes would end up in China's hands on the basis of its present economic strength. There will be concerns about the world trade situation. The announcement of the negotiations for a US-EU FTA, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and just today the announcement of Japan and the EU holding an FTA, beginning their own FTA agreements. If these 3 were to come to fruition, and it's not completely clear that they would eventually completely overwhelm the WTO. The EU-US FTA alone would become the world's global trading standard and the rules-making body. So obviously for the BRICS countries, who are a member of none of these 3, though theoretically at least some of us could be members of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, The question of where exactly world trade or governance probably will be one of the major issues that there will be concerns about. There will be limits to how far they can agree on growth. The first G20 summit that was held after the global financial crisis, there was a consensus on the need for quantitative easing on behalf of the world economy, but the bulk of that quantitative easing was done by the Western economies. There was only a little actually done by the BRICS nations. But a lot of the BRICS nations are no longer able to do very much more, again, except for China. India, for example, really does not have the financial heft, and our own growth rates are relatively low. So the BRICS, I think, will have some principles that they would like to put forward on a common basis. Their ability to actually implement policies that will influence growth will be largely limited to only China.
Okay. Okay, Pramit, stay on. Mr. Badri Kumar, one of the things which is being talked about is this development bank. You think this is something which will become a reality now, and how do you envisage it functioning? The architecture of the bank itself is being discussed a lot about.
I think it's premature to try to get into these details. At the most, what we can expect is a formal decision, an idea, which was born as recently as March
Last year.
The birth pangs of a bank, the gestation period, all that you have to take into account. So much to be discussed: capitalization, voting rights, location, so on. And its whole agenda, has to be fleshed out. So that the summit, you cannot expect all that to happen at the summit. It will have to be done at the level of the experts in the downstream. So what we can expect is probably at the most a decision to constitute a bank. But the important point is this, that this is already unnerved a lot of people. Which is why I think that any notion that excluding these countries, ground rules can be drawn up, formulated regarding the trading system or anything like this, I think is looking back at the past. 2016, China is outstripping the United States. Yeah. Then the kind of Asian framework that is under discussion, including ASEAN, India, and now with our framework with ASEAN very much in place, India is in it. By the end of the year, the process is beginning. ASEAN, India, Japan, China, South Korea, all together. I think there is probably no trading bloc which can rival that.
Mohan, about the bank and what Mr. Badri Kumar said.
Well, there is a peculiar problem here with China. China has 3 trillion in reserves, and it's seeing those dollar reserves devaluing each year because the dollar is devaluing. So it has to park the money somewhere. It can't, and at 0 or maximum of 0.5% interest, it's seeing the money become dust in front of it. So it needs to get the money out from the Western system and put it as investment in other countries. So China is very keen on this. If China is keen, India is in the market for investments. So India would say, why not? Russia has got $500 billion reserve. Russia was also wanting to put its money somewhere. So I think it's an idea whose time has come.
Has come. Okay.
Having said that, where is growth going to come from? Japan is not growing, it's contracting. EU is contracting, it's not growing. It won't grow. Demographically, they're all in tight spots. The US is doing 1 to 2% growth. So, growth has to come from the BRICS countries. Now, Pramit said India is not growing. India is growing at 6%.
Mohan, we need to go into a short break now. We'll come back and continue this discussion. Please keep watching. Welcome back. We are discussing the Durban summit of the BRICS, which will be starting from tomorrow. Mohan, I want you to that what you said about China having this kind of money which it wants to invest, and Russia also has. India is looking for investments. Actually, India wants investment. It doesn't have much to offer to this. What about other countries? Africa is another place where these people will be able to.
Africa is.
And Yeah, please.
is a place where China is already making investments.
Already making
Even
investments.
India has gone into Africa
Yes.
to make investments because that is the next growth market.
Right.
You want to sell goods, you want to sell services, then that's where you go. So, I think the world is in turmoil now, in economic turmoil. BRICS is going to outstrip G7 by 2035. So, that's only 20 years, 22 years from now. So all these things are going to happen in the next 2 decades. In terms of, the span of history is very small.
Yes.
It just passes like that. So I think everybody is trying to stake out positions. But one thing is certain. Demographically, Japan and EU the story is over. Okay, they're not going to grow, they're going to contract.
Right.
Even Russia is going to contract. So that leaves Brazil, India and China and the United States. And the United States itself is changing demographically.
Right.
For the first time last year, the number of non-white babies exceeded the white children.
White children.
It's okay. So, and you have an Obama and demographically you might see an Indian as a candidate for president from the GOP.
Anyway.
All kinds of things are happening.
Nandan,
So I think the old countries, Europe's time is over. Japan's time is also over. So we'll have to wait to see how these things unravel.
Okay, and then one of the things when we talk of how this thing will unravel, the BRICS, the importance of it, everybody understands. But the clash of interests between these countries which are there, has that been resolved to a greater extent, or there are problems between these countries which are unresolvable to at least some of the issues?
No, I'm sure, as with any set of countries, there will be issues which require resolution. But as I said in the beginning, if you look at where they started and you look at where they are now, they have remarkably succeeded in finding common ground. Something nobody was willing to give them, as even at the very beginning. Today also there will be differences, but my personal feeling is that they will, despite opposition, they will keep adding political ballast to what is right now predominantly an economic agenda. And that is where some differences will crop up, but they will be able to sort it out because inexorably the world is moving towards a new order. And these countries are going to be very important in that new order.
Pramit?
Yes.
Pramit, what is your view on this? These differences, the clash of interests between these countries, are they being sorted out? Will they be sorted out in future? Taking the larger interests in view, or will some of the developed countries be able to keep creating this wedge so that this doesn't become a threat to them?
Well, I think there is almost definitely huge political problems within the BRICS. And probably the single worst divide is between India and China. Right. While the China and India relationship is almost will, I think, improve over the next 1 to 2 years, and we'll have to see, which is one of the reasons why the meeting between Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and the new Chinese leader Xi Jinping is in many ways the most important aspect of the BRICS summit in Durban, rather than the BRICS summit itself. The fact remains is that India and China remain extremely suspicious of each other. It's not an accident that India has deployed so many additional troops on the Chinese border over the past few years. It's not an accident that India has almost no FDI from China and continues to restrict the degree of Chinese FDI into this country. Even Russia's second largest arms deployment is on the Chinese border. The BRICS politically remain an extremely divided group internally. And even our trade and investment, if you look at the actual figures within the BRICS, all of the BRICS nations, their single largest trading partner is China. But let's say Brazil and India, Brazil and Russia, South Africa and Russia barely trade or invest with each other. So in effect, within the BRICS economically, China is the hub and all of the other countries are a spoke, which again has certain problems. Again, climate change. Russia is not part of the BASIC group, which is in many ways a BRICS derivative on climate change because Russia does not take the same line on climate change as the rest of the BRICS nations does. Now, this doesn't mean that they don't have common interests. As I've mentioned, in trade, they do. In terms of IMF, World Bank voting rights, they have a similar point of view. There are issues on IPR and so on, which they do agree. But the degree of political commonality between the BRICS nations, particularly between India and China, remains very, very thin.
Okay, Pramit. Mr. Badra Kumar, this meeting, as Pramit was pointing out, the meeting between the Indian Prime Minister and the Chinese President, how important is it? You think it's more important, Pramit thinks that it is more important than the summit itself?
Well, to my mind, the uniqueness of BRICS is that, we don't have to agree on everything. So if you apply the common norm of a grouping, I think it's not applicable. And this may look quite strange because the way it is worked through these 5 summits, including the one which is coming up tomorrow, is that they have agreed to work on the basis of coincidence of interests. Now, this is a new coinage which has come into international diplomacy, what is called network diplomacy.
Right.
Now, this networking is taking place within the BRICS framework and creating a synergy for bilateral relationships also.
Right.
Now, that is what is happening in the case of India and China. Now, as you see the Xi Jinping's recent statement in the interview with PTI, he singled out this about the commonality of interest with China.
Right.
Now, what happens is that over a length of time, a critical mass develops. China has done this extraordinarily well in Central Asia. By the way, they mooted this Shanghai Initiative with Russia.
Right.
And then they had a huge problem in the 1990s, in fact, to come anywhere near Central Asia because all the backlog of the Soviet era. But they used this organization to weather that, to finesse that, and to build sinews into the bilateral relationships.
Right.
I see the same thing happening between China and India. And the fact that in a certain intimate atmosphere, the world leaders, these 5 world leaders could interact with each other, get to know each other, I think it matters a lot.
Okay. Mohan, so actually BRICS can strengthen the Indo-China relationship.
Yes,
Would you see that?
It's also a very different world. You see the emergence of China. You see who's the biggest trading partner is the United States, country it fears the most and distrusts the most. Who's the biggest investor in China? Japan, country it hates the most. Okay, who's the next biggest investor? Taiwan. Okay, so China has shown that you can have all kinds of economic arrangements without having to similarly, adapt your political positions. So I think the Indo-China trade is also a good example. We have problems with China. China has problems with us. But our trade has been growing. So we're talking about BRICS first essentially as an economic arrangement. And that seems to be working. Whether BRICS will work as a political arrangement, we don't know as yet. But the fact that South Africa, which doesn't figure in the list of the next 10 large countries, is in BRICS, is showing that you're getting a political movement here. You got Africa on the table. So I think BRICS is now beginning to take a political direction. We'll have to see how that direction goes. Meantime, all these problems will say that India's got major problems with China. It's all known, okay? But it's also stable.
How they will work around those problems is what matters. Nandan, Africa. See, this being held in Africa for the first time, there are these African countries which is looking up to what the BRICS would be giving them, some of these highly underdeveloped and developing economies there. Do you think this summit will be able to provide some focus on Africa, and will they be able to provide that what they're expecting?
Well, I think that the very theme of...
Because China and India both are interested in Africa now.
The very theme that has been selected about BRICS,
right.
South Africa and, sorry, not South
Africa.
Africa and BRICS, is a reflection of the importance that Africa will play and why all the countries in BRICS are looking at BRICS playing a positive role in the development story of Africa. The only caveat which I will put here is that we should not fall for the projection where it is said that, that South Africa will become the gateway to Africa for all these countries. That's not going to happen. South Africa will be an important partner. But all these countries, whether it's China, India, or Brazil, have independent bilateral relations with many countries in Africa and are going to continue dealing with them bilaterally as well. So it's not as if a BRICS agenda or a BRICS development of Africa story can be imposed on everyone else.
In fact, my question, Pramit, my question actually is, we're talking of the Africa, this whole, the theme of this summit is on Africa. But all the countries here, whether it's India or China or even Russia, they all have interests in different countries of Africa. It is seen as the richest, resources are there. How will BRICS be able to work out around those problems between the countries when they approach Africa, for commercial purposes?
The issue for the BRICS really is, why did South Africa join? South Africa sees itself, because economically, even if in terms of population and territory and so on, it's not really the largest African nation, but economically and in terms of the governance structures and the quality of its commercial enterprises, is by far the most advanced of the African nations. But that's part of the problem. You can see already when Mohamed Morsi the president of Egypt, came to India, he says, I want to join BRICS. And while he is an Arab country, Egypt is also an African nation.
Right.
Because the Egyptians don't like the idea of South Africa being a potential, or seeing as the leader of the African world. Nigeria is another country that is not particularly happy at this idea. So one of the problems that BRICS will face is the idea of, if it's going to be the key body of emerging economies, then how do you actually decide to anoint a leader of Africa by having only South Africa on board? Then if you don't, you could theoretically then have as many as 3 or 4 African nations joining the BRICS, which of course would be making it a very unwieldy body. On the economic side, I don't think South Africa, there's any doubt that none of these countries will see South Africa, as Nandan has correctly said, as its only gateway. India's interests in Ethiopia, Mozambique, Eastern Africa, China's interests in almost every part of Africa are as big, if not greater, than their relationship with South Africa.
And they haven't used South Africa to get there. Anyway, sorry, Pramit, we have completely run out of time, but that was an interesting discussion, and we'll keep a close watch on what happens in Durban. But some of the views expressed here is, it's very clear that BRICS is going to become a major entity in the coming years. So we'll keep a close watch. And thanks to all my guests, Mr. Bhadra Kumar, Mohan Guruswamy, Nandan Unnikrishnan, and Pramit Pal Chaudhary. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on The Big Picture, same time tomorrow.